Hello and welcome back to Proverbs, a letter to my son. Today we're going to look at lesson 9 in the series of 17 lessons. And this section will teach fathers teaching their sons to acquire wisdom. Proverbs chapter 4. If you will remember, in chapter 1, in the first section, we saw the 4 steps to learning and living the book of Proverbs, verses 1 to 6. Then we saw the fear of the Lord that we must acquire and maintain if we are to be successful at performing the 4 steps. And then in verses 8 through 19 of chapter 1, we saw the kind of friends we must reject if we are to maintain a biblical fear of the Lord. And the last paragraph of chapter 1, verses 20 to 33, we saw what happens if we reject wisdom. And if we do reject wisdom, then we can't say that we have a biblical fear of the Lord, and we will not be successful in accomplishing the 4 steps. In chapter 2, we saw how to search for and find wisdom. We find the fear of the Lord that results in wisdom. Then in chapter 3, we saw the blessings that come from doing good, that first half of the chapter, and these are the do's. Do these things. In the second part of chapter 3, we saw the security that comes from not doing evil. These are the don't. Don't do the things it said there. And I entitled this chapter, Wisdom with the Boots On, because here we're displaying wisdom to the public. We've gained wisdom, and now we're going to use it and show that we indeed have it. Now in chapter 4, there are 3 parts to it. The first part, verses 1 through 9, is a father, King David, teaching his son Solomon to acquire and espouse wisdom. And then the next 2 sections, verses 10 through 27, Solomon is teaching his own son to acquire and use wisdom correctly. And those 2 sections, verses 10 to 9, are the don'ts, don't do these certain things, and then the do's, verses 20 to 27, but do these things. I'd like to compare chapter 3 to chapter 4. In chapter 3, wisdom's conduct in public, what people see, that is, wisdom on display. And then in chapter 4, this is wisdom's conduct in private, wisdom under control. You'll see when we get there. So I've entitled chapter 3 as Wisdom with the Boots On, and chapter 4 as Wisdom with the Brakes On. He's teaching Rehoboam, his son, how to conduct himself on a personal level. Now, I'd like to show you the chapter 4 as kind of a picture breakdown, verses 1 through 9. And Solomon says, Solomon's dad actually is teaching Solomon, David's teaching him. He says, get wisdom. It will make your life sweet. And it did. And then the next section, verses 10 through 19, Solomon is teaching his sons, more precisely his son Rehoboam. And this is part 1 of his teaching, and it's the don'ts. Don't do these things that he's getting ready to share. He said, get wisdom, avoid evil people and their activities. And then the last section, verses 20 to 27, are the do's, part 2 of Solomon's teaching Rehoboam. And it is, let wisdom guard what you see, what you say, and what you do. Now, in each of these sections, there is an introduction. You see in the verses 1 through 9, verses 1 and 2 are introduction, and you see the others there. And we'll touch on those as we go through. Now, in this chapter, David has taught Solomon, as a young child, taught Solomon. And Solomon's trying to get Rehoboam to see the value of wisdom. So in the first section, he says, my dad taught me some good stuff, and it worked. And basically, in the next 2 sections, he's saying, now this stuff worked for me, and I'm going to teach you somewhat the same thing, and it'll work for you. So listen up, pay attention. So let's go to verses 1 through 9, that first section where David is teaching Solomon. In the first 2 verses, Solomon's just saying, listen, son, this is important stuff. And it's Solomon's call for his sons to listen to his teaching. Notice in verse 1, it says sons. When you get to verse 10, it says son. And I believe he's switching from all his other sons to the one son, Rehoboam. So in verses 1 and 2, he says, "Sons, all of you, listen carefully to what I'm about to teach you. Pay close attention so that you'll understand the importance of what I have to say. My teaching is good, dependable, and trustworthy, so don't turn your back on it." So now Solomon starts to share what his dad taught. Solomon said, "When I was just a kid, Dad taught me." So here we're looking at verses 3 through 9. And if you have your Bible open, you can see these verses in the text. Solomon said, "When I was just a kid, Dad taught me," verses 3 through 9. And guess what? It worked for me. So let's look at those verses. I'm going to paraphrase the verses. My dad David said, "Make my teaching so important to you personally that you'll perform it for as long as you live. If you do, you'll live to be an old man." And then we look at verses 4 and 5. Here's the crux of that's David's teaching. Get wisdom and understanding, and once you find them, never lose sight of them. Here's the idea that David's trying to get across. Love wisdom, and she'll protect you. Abandon wisdom, and that protection goes away. The teaching we're talking about right now, Solomon was younger. He's still in the prime of his rule. He's a good man, apparently a godly man. But later on, he abandoned wisdom to worship his wives' gods, and Solomon lost his kingdom. So the principle is true. Love wisdom, she'll protect you. Abandon wisdom, and you're history. Now let's look at verse 7 of verses 3 to 9. Wisdom is the principal thing. Therefore get wisdom, and with all thy getting, get understanding. The Amplified says of this verse, wisdom is supreme. Get wisdom, yes, though it cost all you possess. Get understanding. I particularly like the New American Standard Translation. It says the beginning of wisdom is acquire wisdom, and with all you're acquiring, get understanding. So basically it's saying wanting wisdom and being willing to search for it is indeed the beginning of wisdom. It's the important thing. It's the most important thing. So go for it. And certainly wanting wisdom and being willing to search for it is the beginning of becoming wise. So let's look at the verses 8 through 9. Let's just read it. Wisdom is the principal thing. Therefore get wisdom. With all thy getting, get understanding. Exalt her, and she shall promote thee. She shall bring thee to honor when thou dost embrace her. She shall give to thine head an ornament of grace, a crown of glory she shall deliver to thee. Notice, if you exalt wisdom, she'll promote you. In other words, she'll lift you up. If you embrace her, she'll bring you to honor or give you a good reputation. She'll give you an ornament of grace or make you a beautiful person, and she'll give you a crown of glory or elevate you to a place of honor. Now Solomon says to his son Rehoboam, I've done all of these things, and you can see how well it worked out for me. And basically he's saying, it can work for you too. So we just looked at David's admonition of Solomon. Now we're going to look at Solomon's admonition to Rehoboam. So in verses 10 through 19, part 1 of his two teachings here, and he's saying, Rehoboam, it worked for me. I know it'll work for you. So now I'm going to teach you. What you going to teach him? Well, first I'm going to teach you how to live wisdom by avoiding evil, verses 10 to 19. These are the don'ts. Remember, avoiding evil. Second, I'm going to teach you how to live wisdom by guarding your steps, verses 10 through 27. These are the do's. Let's look first at the don'ts, verses 10 through 19. Now remember the pictorial view of the chapter. This is the part 1, the don'ts. And here we'll look at the introduction now, verses 10 through 13. And again, I will paraphrase these verses, and you may want to follow along in your Bible. In verse 10, he said, Rehoboam, make my teaching yours for life, and you'll live to be an old man. Verse 11, I've taught you by example, and I've taught you by lecture. I've shown you how wisdom works by how I live and how I act. And there have been times when I sat down to lecture you on wisdom. So I've taught you both ways. It's there for you. I've tried to give it to you. In verse 12, if you do what I say, nothing will prevent you from living good and godly, and nothing will make you stumble or fall. And then verse 13, grab a hold of instruction and don't let go. Your life depends on it, just like my dad taught me. So in other words, pay attention to what I'm teaching you and do it. That's the whole essence of this introduction. So now we're going to look at what the don'ts are. What is it he's not supposed to do? So let's look. We're going to be looking at verses 14 through 19, the don'ts. And here we go. Verse 14. Don't say, think, or do wicked things. Don't go there. Don't do it. Don't join wicked people in their evil deeds. And don't approve of their actions. Just stay away. Avoid engaging in any kind of wicked deeds personally, and don't go out of curiosity to see what these wicked people are doing. Now, if you happen to come upon them doing their evil deeds, get out of there as soon as you can. Don't have anything to do with them. Well, why avoid this kind of people? Well, in verse 16, they're totally engrossed in their sin, and they want nothing else. That's all they care about. That's it. And notice I've skipped verse 18. I jumped right to verse 19. They go through life blinded to the truth, and they can't understand why all of the problems overtake them. And you know what? Disaster waits for them in the end. Don't go there. Don't be party with them. You don't want to end up the same way, because the text says, although disaster waits them, but life just keeps getting better and better and better for those who live good and godly. Rehoboam, do you want to live a long life? You want a blessed life? Do what I say. Don't take part in these sinful activities. The fear of the Lord in Proverbs majors on avoiding or abandoning sinful practice. So, son, avoid or abandon any sinful practice, and don't join those who do. Now, part 2, verses 20 through 27. And these are the do's. Do this. Where before it said, don't have any part with wickedness, now he's saying, do these things. Make living wisely a matter of the heart. Now, back to our picture, we're looking at part 2, verses 20 to 27, the do's. And here's the introduction to this short section. Verses, again, I'm going to paraphrase. Give my teaching your full attention and listen with interest. Pay attention. Put everything else aside. Find a way to keep them, that's my teaching, in sight and on your mind. Make them a heart attitude. And this is important because living my teaching results in abundant life and health. There he's talking about good life and a long life again. Now, here's the crux of what he's teaching. Everything you do emanates from the heart. Everything. You teach your mind and you do certain thing, and you do it and you do it and 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 do it until it becomes who you are. That's when it becomes a matter of the heart. You do it because that's who you are. That's who you have become. So he's saying, pay attention. Everything emanates from the heart. Therefore, guard your heart. Guard your heart. Be careful what you allow yourself to see and what you hear, and anything that would enter your heart that would be contrary to good and godly living. Guard your heart. Guard your mind. Don't look at pornography. Don't look at these movies. There was nothing but bad stuff. Lots of areas like that. Guard what goes into your mind, and you drive your heart by what your mind thinks. So, guard your heart. And then in verse 24 it says, guard what you say. Only say things that are edifying, that are good and godly. Don't run people down. Don't tell lies. Guard what you say. Be a good and godly young man. And then guard what you gaze at. Don't watch stuff that you know is not good for you. Don't watch stuff that's going to leave a bad impression in your mind. If you watch pornography, if you're like most people, and you probably are, you see an image of some scanty clad gal or maybe nothing on, and that image may come back into your mind 20 years later. And it's like, where'd that come from? So guard what you look at. And then guard where you go. Don't go anywhere that you cannot be glad for someone else to see you go. You don't want to sneak into a bar or something like that. Your testimony depends on it. Guard where you go. Only go places that are going to be uplifting and helpful. Don't go those places that'll tear you down or give you a bad reputation. This is chapter 4 of Proverbs. And Solomon is saying, son, I suspect that you have somewhat of a rebellious streak. Don't go there. Be a good and godly man. Choose wisdom. Do like I did and espouse wisdom and live it. Life will be sweet for you, but you have to choose it. And the question is, will you? And I ask you, who are listening, who are watching, have you chosen wisdom? Are you doing the 3 searches that we saw in Proverbs chapter 2? And have you found a biblical fear of the Lord? Is it driving what you do, causing you to choose to be good and godly and avoid sinful practices? I hope so. In these first 4 chapters of Proverbs, everything depends on what came before. Now when we leave chapter 4, there'll be different subjects at different times. But this first 4 chapters have been sweet. I hope you'll go back and look again. I hope Proverbs has come alive for you as you watch the videos. I hope so. It sure has for me. Well, I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson. I hope you'll join me. Thank you.